there are a sizable number of people who are quite literally addicted to iconoclasm, to smashing things up. They get such a rush from the victimhood, challenging, from all of those things. And the destruction that comes out of that, I think people need to appreciate it for what it is. And it's getting to this idea of rock bottom. But I was thinking about this. I was thinking about how can we describe the culture? And it's almost like the culture's in the grip of an addiction.
Welcome to the New Flesh podcast, the podcast you deserve. My name is Jonathan Atcho. With me, as always, is Ricky Allpike. Ricky, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I thought you had a little extra to say there.
No, because I just want to get that out of the way. I don't really care how you are. I got a question for you. Do you like history?
I do like history, yes.
Well, that was a trick. It's actually herstory. So
yes.
You failed. You failed. Yeah, this has actually been a 180 episode sting to cancel you.
Yes,
and
just to expose me.
Yeah, and so now everyone knows. But please don't expose yourself to today's guest, Phillip Kiszely from the New Culture Forum, among other things. He's going to talk to us about culture, history, some film stuff in there. So, I mean, yeah, I'm pumped.
Yeah, me too. Phillip Kiszely is a published author and academic, currently a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, appearing weekly on their YouTube program NEWSPEAK. His work covers 20th century British cultural and political history with a focus on television, film and music. He is the co-founding editor of the international peer-reviewed journal Punk and Post-Punk, and his book Hollywood Through Private Eyes deals with screen adaptations of hard-boiled detective novels. Phillip has also completed a short documentary for the New Culture Forum entitled The War on Our History, which is part of their Heresy series. We're delighted to have him on the show to discuss history and culture. Phillip, welcome to the New Flesh.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So, Phillip, you've written and spoken about history quite a bit in recent times, which is why we feel you're eminently qualified to answer this question. Is our history problematic? Let me put it another way. Is it fair to say that Dunkirk has a black trans lesbian problem?
It's one of those things, isn't it, where I look back. I've always been interested in history, like most people, but I've had a professional interest in history for the best part of 20 years now. I think, looking back, I was a bit naive because I, like most people, I saw the signs of what we were doing with history, and we were doing it increasingly. And it's something that Frank Furedi, the sociologist Frank Furedi, and you might have had him on I think you've had him on the show, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah, he calls it reading history backwards. Okay, so essentially it's looking back through history and plotting, taking out these little bits and pieces that essentially you hate and measuring them against the values, a specific set of values from one dominant cultural group, and finding them wanting. And that's happening more and more and more. So what we don't do properly is look at history and construct it and try to understand the past. We tell history off. We look at the past and we tell history off. Why do we do that? Because it makes us feel good about ourselves, or it makes the group that does that feel good about themselves. And there are other reasons why that happens as well. But I think really that's the main one. We measure the past against ourselves. We find it wanting, and aren't we sophisticated? Aren't we great? And I think that's something that really happens. So I'd been aware of that. If you're a historian, you can't not be aware of that. But I hadn't thought that we would be rewriting history to the extent we are doing. And I didn't even think that 5 years ago, but I'm here now. And this is pretty much, in terms of my public work, this is all I do. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about these particular agendas, and I never used to. Perhaps I should have thought about them more 10 years ago.
So just to follow up there, is that idea of like looking back into history and measuring or comparing that to current morals, is that something that's always happened in our pursuit or our study of history?
Yeah, I think it has to a certain extent. We see the past through the prism of ourselves, I think, because it's impossible not to do that. But I think what's happened is the balance has changed. We don't narrate history anymore. We simply deconstruct, and we don't construct the past. I would describe myself as a constructivist historian, in which sense I want to understand how people felt and what people did and what they were like and what they thought. I don't necessarily just want to kind of look at them in a one-dimensional way and, as I said before, tell them off. People are different. People were different in the past. They looked different. They smelled differently. They certainly thought differently because their experience was completely different. I'm old enough to remember the late 70s and 1980s, and people were different again then. It just feels as though we're going through a particular kind of revolution, and it feels like it's going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better, because we're destroying our history, we're destroying our backstory, our grand narratives, and we're doing it for a reason. And it's because those stories, they're part of our identity, and the woke, I hate that word, but it's the best word to use. The woke revolutionaries want to destroy that identity.
It seems strange that progressives are so obsessed with identity, but then they're sort of kind of erasing our identity by rewriting history, or just picking the bits that they want, or or casting it in sort of a disingenuous light.
Yeah, I think there's something perverse going on, and when we talk about progressives, we're actually talking about authoritarians now, aren't we? And when I've just been here in the UK this weekend. There's been a protest in Scotland around trans ideology, and the progressives are carrying banners saying "decapitate TERFs," and "I eat TERFs," and there's a fetishistic violence towards women. And sexual violence towards children that seems to be developing and is burgeoning around a lot of progressive narratives, which is extremely worrying.
Well, just on that, this nastiness that we've seen seems to go unpunished, and sometimes it seems sanctioned almost. This stuff we see coming from the left. Where does this extraordinarily awful behaviour come from, and why is it allowed to continue? This could be anything from, as you just mentioned, these horrendous sort of sexually charged or violent signs we see at these trans rallies, which are in any plain sense so awful. I just don't know how anyone could stand next to them. But then we've got stalking sometimes, obviously massive doxing, and all the way down to workplace ramifications. But or even to the end. I mean, I don't know how far they want to take it, because sometimes it really seems they're trying to drive people to suicide or something. So I mean, I just want to know if you've got a sort of a big picture theory as to why everything is so nasty, particularly from that side at the moment.
The reason it doesn't go unchallenged, I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? To begin with, and then we might think about motivation after that. But one of the reasons it doesn't go unchallenged is because historically they're always seen to be on, the right side of history. It's if you think about civil rights, if you think about gay rights, if you think about class struggle, all of those things we look back on and we think, well, actually, yes, those are all perfectly legitimate things, and now we have a society that is much better for that struggle. So there's a heritage thing going on there, and the hashtag at the moment is right side of history, isn't it? So they're using that, and people do feel that oh well, it's coloration, isn't it? It's self-identity. I feel as though I am a progressive. This is all in the name of progressive politics. So I'm hesitant to challenge it. This isn't right-wing skinheads wearing Doc Martens and kicking the shit out of people for fun, or at least it doesn't look like that. This is men identifying as women. These tend to be university students. They tend to be middle class often. They tend to be really quite literate. They're educated. They live online as much as anything. So there's a sense that the violence doesn't seem, the violence is virtual at the moment, but I think it's like a horrible waiting game. I'm waiting for that to change. I'm waiting for that to become much more real and much more prevalent. But I think that's one of the reasons why. I think historically people see themselves as progressives, and they see themselves often. Many people see themselves culturally on the left, and they see that, well, actually, I should be supporting this. I should be supporting trans rights, and I'll turn a blind eye to some of the stuff that's going on. But I think culturally, I mean, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think culturally, this stuff is almost like an addiction. If you see this stuff online, and it feels as though it's almost like an addiction to pornography or an addiction to alcoholism or something like that, or alcohol. And it feels as though the culture's got to get to rock bottom before it starts getting better. It's what I was saying before about things are going to have to, get worse before they start getting better. I think it will have to do, because I think people need to, the people looking on, I think people need to see more egregious examples. I think people need to see very definite evidence of all of this bile and hatred, of the stuff we saw on Saturday here in Glasgow. So I think that's one thing, but I think we've got to come to terms with what this addiction is, and there are a sizable number of people who are quite literally addicted to iconoclasm, to smashing things up. They get such a rush from the victimhood, challenging, from all of those things, and the destruction that comes out of that. I think people need to appreciate it for what it is. And it's getting to this idea of rock bottom. I don't know whether you agree with that, actually. You might not do. But I was thinking about this. I was thinking about how can we describe the culture? And it's almost like the culture's in the grip of an addiction. And I would say identitarianism, intersectionality is a kind of addiction. It's pushing for that virtuous high all the time, pushing. And there's such a pleasure in the iconoclasm. There's such a pleasure in the destruction. There's such a pleasure in the assertion of self. It feels as though there's a long way to go before that can begin to be dismantled, and we can begin to have rational, reasonable discussions about things like race, gender, sexuality, the environment, all of those things.
I think I'm just struck by, and this reference might come from the second half of our conversation, perhaps, but I'm just fascinated. You said these people seem literate, and I'm fascinated by that, because there seems to be a lack of wisdom. When I watch a film like Death Wish, I can recognize that the streets are bad, and bad things are happening, and we've got to do something about that. And although it might feel good and righteous, it's by any means necessary approach will not give me the result that I expect. And it's funny that is a film that, just a mainstream little film that can bring you that little kernel that you go, oh yes, by any means necessary. That's a a tricky road to go down. Yet these people seem to be, no one is calling out this attitude amongst all these people. We see, it doesn't matter. Statues thrown into the ocean, who cares? Businesses burnt down in some places. Doesn't matter that they're owned by immigrants or whatever. So I'm just fascinated that at the lack of wisdom there, and everyone seems to be sort of supporting them in this project of, as you say, iconoclasm.
It's a broader problem, and I think the problem we've got in the culture is that we celebrate the teenage, we celebrate the adolescent. We think children are full of wisdom, and children are not. You only get wisdom through experience. Children are not full of wisdom. Children might be clever, and they might have some insight, but they're not. But the culture is this adolescent adoration of revolution as well. If you are good and you're a vibrant person and you're doing things, then you're revolutionary. Let's change things. It's always, well, why don't we change things? Let's move forward. And there's some, there's some good in changing things, and we do have to move forward, and we do have to change with the times. But there is this sense of adoring change for the sake of it. So I think some of it comes out of that, and the romance, the adolescent romance of being a revolutionary. A lot of this stuff is online. I spend way too much time on Twitter, but I've only been on it for about a year or so, actually.
I just watched a video where you said, I'm not on Twitter, and then suddenly, and now you're on it all the time.
Now I am. Yeah. I wish I wasn't actually now. I shouldn't be. I kind of thought, well, maybe I should be at that time, because that's kind of where it's all happening. And yes, it's all happening there. I've seen it, and I don't need to see any more. But it is on there, and that is where the ideas are formulating, and that's where the madness is, and the madness percolates down into the institutions, but it's driven. It's actually driven online. I think it used to be the other way. The institutions used to lead, but I don't think they do anymore. I think it's driven by this craziness, and you see it. You see it. The thing that I've just been talking about in Glasgow, and wherever Posey Parker is, all the stuff that follows her, all of the protest that follows her, is a physical manifestation of Twitter. And as I said before, it's only going to be a question of time before that protest turns into something different. You can see the same thing with the environment. That's, those protests which are essentially kind of throwing soup. And isn't it hilarious when they get it all over themselves, when they throw something at a building and all of a sudden they're turned into the Tango Man, that again, I feel as though that's going to escalate, and that might well turn into terrorism. I hope. My God, I hope not. But that's my fear, and I think it comes from this disembodied space, which is the online, which is very new. Social media is very new. We don't know what the hell we're doing with it, but everybody knows when you're in this online space, it feels like you're disengaged, you're disassociated from physical consequences. That's why they love it so much, But there's the one guy who's just been tweeting about J.K. Rowling and Posey Parker and death threats and all the rest of it. He's been outed, and there are consequences, and some he's going to have to face the music. But there's this sense of this space where anything goes, and it's really, really frightening. So I think that's, again, to answer the question in a very long form way, I think that's where it comes from.
Well, they seem to have a narrative about Western history that our societies have gleefully bounded from massacre to massacre while raping the earth and filling the sky with black smoke and their pockets with riches. I mean, what do you think the end goal in pushing this kind of narrative is?
You see, I don't think they know what the end goal is. I think they know, but they don't really. They've got no idea what the end goal will be. I know what it's going to be. My family comes from Hungary. And my father was born in 1933, lived through Nazi occupation, lived through Soviet occupation, escaped from Hungary in 1956, had a gun to his head. They pulled the trigger, there was no bullets in it, and they laughed, the Russian soldiers. He got out of the country. And everything that the equity merchants want, everything that the revolutionaries want, always turns to shit, always turns to the Soviet Union, always turns to North Korea, always turns to China. So that would be where we're going. They don't think that, because if they think, when immature people think in utopian terms, they just think of sunshine, but of course, we're heading for the darkest night possible. And this is what happens when the culture is driven by immature often isolated, vulnerable revolutionaries. And I don't want to be part of it.
Well, do you think that countries outside the West view their history in the same way that we see in the Anglosphere? I'm pretty sure all of our countries in the Anglosphere have the same rot. So, what's your experience of other countries, or what do you reckon?
No, I don't think they do. Let's just stick with Eastern Europe for the moment. And particularly Hungary, because I know it very well. I know the other countries as well. I've traveled quite widely in Central and Eastern Europe, but I think Hungary's history is defined by tragedy. Okay, and their idea of self is about preservation more than anything else. I think countries in the Anglosphere, their idea of history in terms of the dominant culture is defined by guilt. And those two emotions work in very, very different ways when you think about your past and your identity. So the guilt that drives through the institutions, through the media, through the Church of England, actually, through the civil service, but mostly through the education institutions. All of that stuff is about deconstructing that past, problematizing that past, thinking that we need to decenter ourselves because of the rest of the world. It's about things coming to an end as well. It's about, being, I suppose, culturally and politically dominant for a very, very long time, and that just coming to an end. It's like, an empire coming to an end. There's part of that as well, an ennui. But I think the two driving forces there with other countries, it's tragedy, especially with Eastern Europe, and with the West and the Anglosphere, is guilt. And I think there's something really in that.
But you said it, Philip. Why don't we say the word, I guess we might as well say it, white guilt, more? I feel like that's a term that had its day and no one says it anymore. I reckon it would be so much better if some of these companies like BMW or whatever said, yeah, we're doing this diversity down. Everyone said, it's a bit like in Seinfeld when he says, why are you returning this? And he goes, first bite, you should just be able to say, why are you doing this? For white guilt. And then that would, to me, make a lot more sense. But I feel like they don't want to put a plain name to it. So we consult Robin DiAngelo and all the rest of them to come up with, creepy corporate names. But this is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, it works in various ways, doesn't it? Because it's not just political and it's not just cultural. It's actually a marketing tool as well. So, you have to buy into all of these narratives to, how many times have you kind of, you bought a pot of yogurt or something, and it's all about how this thing is going to be recycled and what it's doing for the environment and what you're doing for the environment. And if you recycle it, you're going to be a good person. I'm thinking about my lemon curd yogurt. I'm not thinking about being a good person. But if they don't buy into this kind of thing, then they're terrified. It becomes it's the tyranny of all of this stuff. You see it on adverts, especially in this country. I don't know what it's like where you are, but on adverts on this country, there's been an exodus of white people, and there's been an particularly white middle-aged men. The culture doesn't speak to me. White middle-aged men. I don't exist. Okay. Heterosexual white middle-aged men are just removed from all of that thing, because if they were there, then the product would be in danger. So this is how this kind of stuff works. But the minute you start saying, oh well, what we're talking about here is white guilt, they don't say that, because you say, all right, well, let's deconstruct white guilt, and let's what actually have we got to be guilty about, or more importantly, as Douglas Murray does in his latest book, The War in the West, what should we celebrate about ourselves? And I think the last chapter of his book is a celebration of Western culture. It's huge, so they don't want to do that. No, that's the last thing they want to do. Let's not mention white guilt now. It was mentioned a while ago. Let's just let it play out. And I think that's how it works.
Well, let's get practical for a second here. How do we rescue history?
God, that's a tough question. People ask me what success looks like in this kind of stuff. So I do quite a lot of public speaking, and I'm on television quite a bit, and I do these podcasts and all of that kind of thing. What does success look like in rescuing the culture, first of all? Okay, well, it doesn't look like getting sacked, okay, from your job and being cancelled and all of that kind of thing, right? So you can't, unless you can make a stand, unless you're financially independent and all of that kind of stuff. You can't actually just, say it as it is, get sacked and end up working a night shift in a supermarket. That's not what success looks like to me. Okay. I think I've just written a chapter for the New Culture Forum book, Fighting Back, which is absolutely about this. And I think for me, success is actually quite small steps at the moment. Okay, so I think it's doing things in your life personally that you're happy with and you feel kind of represent integrity. And they can be really, really small things. Okay, but I think really where the fight back starts and where we save our history is the education system. Now, in this country, we've had, 12 going on 13 years of conservative rule, right? And they've done absolutely nothing to save that education system from what I would call an identitarian onslaught from revolutionary Marxists. The institutions are absolutely and totally captured. Okay, so the easy thing that people say is, well, what should we do? Well, we should build new universities. We should build new universities. Okay, in what universe are you going to get the money to build new universities? How are you going to get all of those things through the various processes, checks and balances where you create a university? We have the independent University of Buckingham here, but that's an awful long time, an awful lot of money. I'm not saying we shouldn't go down that route, but that is a generational route. I think we should teach in different ways, and I think we should. Organizations like the New Culture Forum, for example, Battle of Ideas, Screwtopia, all of these smaller educational either institutions or summer schools or whatever you want to call them, I think should be more engaged with delivering and challenging orthodoxies in education. And I think that's the way to go about it. That's one way. I think there are lots and lots of other ways, but for me, as a teacher, that's one of the things that I really feel we're just teaching our students that and our pupils self-loathing, and it's turning that it's the intellectual kernel of who and what we are. And then from there, everything else kinds of falls into place. Then you can start thinking about historical narratives. But I suppose you've got to position yourself first in relation to those historical narratives. Position yourself reasonably. Yeah. And that means getting away from this obsessive guilt, this obsessive self-hatred, this obsessive self-flagellation.
Do you think part of the problem is that we put too much emphasis on having a university degree? Like, it's a bit of an arms race, Oh, I've got a certificate. Oh, well, I've got a bachelor's degree. Oh, here's my master's. Here's my PhD. Like, back in the day, say an industry like journalism, it would be a bit more of a trade. You would shadow someone. You would, get a job in the copy room, and you'd work your way up, and you'd learn the ropes. Like, do you think we need to, in some industries at least, go back to that sort of a model?
I think it will go back to that kind of a model. I think what's happening with universities, and we're seeing it in this country, is that universities have moved away from teaching subjects. And you see, I'm talking about the arts, humanities, and social sciences here. You don't get taught the subject, you just get taught a set of values. Intersectional values. So if you're reading literature or drama or something like that, you don't get a sense of a canon, a body of work. You get a sense of how you can apply queer theory to a particular text, or you get a sense of how you can racialize something. So you can't read literature. Literature is just absolutely collapsed into, it's almost like a spot the there's sexism there, there's racism there, there's transphobia there. It's we're reading 17th century stuff. There's transphobia there. It's ludicrous. So I think what the universities are doing are painting themselves into a corner, and they are not providing an education. Some of them are it has to be said, are providing a ideological indoctrination. And I think more and more people are seeing that. I get that all the time. I get people writing to me all the time and saying, well, I don't feel as though I should, my daughter or my son is at the age to go to university, but I really don't think they should. I'm frightened of them going. I'm frightened of them going to university because I'm worried about what they're going to do, what they're going to pick up. I don't think they're going to learn anything meaningful. And you have to say, well, I can see where your concerns are. It's
funny, John and I, we're afraid of what our kids are going to learn in primary school. They're not even there yet.
Yeah, I mean, curiously enough, it seems that for all sorts of reasons, it seems that in this country, Scotland is at the vanguard of all of this stuff, and they've just done this gender recognition thing, which the government have just pushed back, which it's really about children, being able to identify their gender. And one Scottish politician, I think she's called Maggie Chapman. I think she's a Green politician, Scottish Green politician. So, children as young as 8 should be allowed to identify their own gender. That's where we are. I don't have to give any commentary on that, what I think about that. I don't think, because it's self-explanatory, but it's frightening,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I just want your advice, Philip. I mean, this will be an ongoing question, I'm sure, but how do we bridge the gap? Because when I talk to my family or some they're all pretty much normies we're surrounded by, and so they don't know about libs of TikTok, and they don't, which is good in a way, So, but the moment, because you said it before, you said the word that would I think be a red flag for them. You said Marxists, and the moment you say Marxist, normies just go, they just switch off. They just go, oh, okay, so I don't have to listen anymore, and so. Then you lose you lose the ability to explain to them that the curriculum their kid is being taught is filled with nonsense written by academics, written by self-selected academics, and it's as plain as day. And because even when I started to go down the track, with a couple of my relatives just the other day. It was coming out all wrong. And they looked at me and they said stuff like, my brother-in-law, who I love dearly, he looked at me like all serious and said, well, we want the kids to know what happened, and there was this underline there, as if I was trying to, I don't know, scrub all the bad bits or something. So it was anyway, the point is, how do we bridge the gap for people?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because what people tend to do, and this is people, social conservatives, actually, or we call normies. That's a great word, isn't it? Normies, yeah. What they tend to do is say, oh yeah, it's political correctness gone mad. It's all of those things. It's just a bit crazy, and we understand that, we appreciate that. But actually, once the child goes to university, it'll be different. No, it won't. Or once the child leaves university, it'll be different. And once they've got the responsibility of a mortgage, of children, of all of those things, then they'll just see it for what it was. I think that's the most dangerous position you can have, right? Because what you really need to do is look at the detail. The devil's in the detail. It's not really about political correctness. That's a phrase that kind of died years and years ago, but people still use it. This is about absolutely and totally drilling down to the fundamentals of our identity and changing them, messing with them. It's about taking the grand narratives, not only that we make sense of the world and the nation by, but the grand narratives which we make sense of ourselves by, and changing them and messing with them. And if you're doing that with 8-year-olds, it reminds me of the Big Lebowski, 8-year-olds, dude. It's that craziness. If you're doing that with 8-year-olds, then you can't really come back from that. It's the same thing with critical race theory. Okay, it's not political correctness gone mad. It's much more detailed. It's much more complex than that. Your whole being, your whiteness is historically, ancestrally evil. Okay, it's difficult to come back from that. It's difficult to move away from that and say, all right, well, how can we make it better? The point is you can't, right? You can't. All you can ever do is just suffer in this evilness. So the point I'm trying to make is that people need to take notice, and they need to look at the detail, and they need to say, well, actually, what are you teaching my 7 or 8-year-old? What are you teaching my teenager? How do I feel about this? How do other parents feel about this? Okay, what's going on? What is this critical race theory? What is queer theory? What are the ramifications of collapsing every single boundary and border of our lives? What's going on there? So it's asking those questions. So you have to, this is what they say, isn't it? Educate yourself. But you really do. You need to have a handle on where this stuff comes from. You need to have some kind of understanding of what it can do. And then I think you can probably make some decisions. But until then, I think what you've just described there is that most people, I think, come up against that, and you have to say, look, no, really, you don't know what's going on here. The devil's in the detail, and you need to enter the culture war. You need to fight. You need to push back on these ideas, and we as a society need to offer some viable alternatives.
Well, it's interesting. I've got a unique experience because Ricky and I think his kid's about to start primary school. Mine's about to start daycare, and so I've read some of their curriculum. There's some not great stuff in there, but then a few years ago I went back to university. Had a bit of a crisis and went back and studied literature, thinking it was going to be me standing on the desk for Robin Williams, and reading out poetry and Shakespeare and all that. And I had to fight really hard to find the literature units, to group them all together, to not have to do all the other stuff, to get credits, to get rid of dumb units. And then I have no way to describe the way. No one had told me. They should have got up at the beginning and said, oh, by the way, since you went to uni first time, this whole place has been totally captured by postmodernism. So the idea is that there is no such thing as aesthetics. There's no such thing as good literature. In fact, a graphic novel is just as good as Hamlet, is as good as a video game. And here's the key word, because this just is why I started this whole rant, is because this whole thing seems so joyless. It is such a joy. I wanted great books. I wanted all the great books, and I got, even when these PhD students got up to talk to us about why we should study a PhD, it was just people who kind of hated the people they were studying, or spending their lives hating,
Look, I'm laughing, right? And we can see each other. I know this is just an audio podcast. We can see each other, and I'm laughing, and I'm not laughing because I find it funny, right? I'm laughing just because I know precisely what you mean. Okay, I know exactly what you mean. I think, how about this? You've just described that. Okay, let me just throw this back to you then. And it feels as though education generally, I'm not picking on any particular institution here, but it feels as though education generally has fallen into this cult-like religion. Okay, and everything comes back to the same thing. It should be a marketplace of ideas. Okay, it should be a bastion of free thinking if we think about the university. But what you've just described there is it's like a religion, isn't it? And it's this place where we study this stuff, and we have a moral stance on this stuff, and you're there literally to rubbish the whole thing. It's the opposite of what it should be. You're there to rubbish the whole thing because it's wicked and it's evil. And we don't have this kind of confidence in ourselves. We don't have, we're in this post-religion moment, aren't we, in the West? It's probably slightly different in America, but I think in the UK and in Australia probably, and on the seaboards of the States, we're in this post-religion moment, and we've got it's this transition. It's a metaphysical transition. We're trying to find out not just who we are, but what we are, and that we're trying to have a new sense of what we are, and we're looking for something to believe in. The culture is looking for something to believe in, and we don't know. We haven't got something to believe in as a culture, but what we do have is something very definite to repudiate. And what happens is that we spend all of our time, rewriting history, destroying the culture, but there's nothing meaningful there to take its place. And that's the really worrying thing, that when you tell me about your university course there, you're talking about iconoclasm, you're talking about destruction, you're talking about, self-loathing. But that's part of a revolution, isn't it? That's one half of a revolution. The other part is the new utopia. What's going to take its place? And it seems to me we've only got a set of societies that are built on rights claims, and that there's nothing of any more substance that's there. It's a set of societies that are built on rights claims, and that's the worst possible. I sound like Douglas Murray here, don't I? But it's the worst possible foundation for a society, because rights claims change all the time. You see, we've been talking about the clash between trans and women. So this trans rights claim now, which is the center of leftist thinking now, didn't really exist 20 years ago, but it clashes massively with women's rights in terms of sports, in terms of spaces, in terms of safeguarding, all of those things. And so what we're going towards is something that is hideously unstable, like many of the people who are promoting these things.
But perhaps they could have, and this is my final point on it, because I could go, I think I'm going into the stratosphere with this point, but if they went to university, some of these people, and read that text from hundreds of years ago, Hamlet, and saw the hand-wringing of someone who, the whole play, wondered what the right thing to do was. Is it right? Is it right to avenge my father? Is it right? What does it mean to be a good king? Well, if I kill him, will I be a good king? Will I be a good son? I've been asked to do it. He's right in front of me. Should I do it? No, I can't. So it's this kind of wisdom, I think, is totally missing from the progressive side of the persuasion. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's something else to add there, and there's an element of laziness, right? Intellectual laziness. But let's just get back to Hamlet for a second. Psychologically, it's amazing. You read that, and it's in lots of ways it's a case study of clinical depression. It's this idea of just being frozen and not knowing what to do, and it's a remarkable to think that it's 400 years old. My God, it's remarkable, and you can get lost in that narrative. But part of the problem we've got is a sense of intellectual laziness. Okay, there's a sense that all of my ideas are already there in neat theoretical little boxes that I can just take off the shelf and apply to a text. Okay, I don't have to think, what should I do with this? Oh, feminism, post-colonialism. Yeah, it's all there. It's all done. I don't have to think about the text, actually. I just have to pick pieces out. I can just go through on a computer, put in keywords, and then say, oh, racism. Yeah.
It's a browser extension.
It's laziness. Okay, it's intellectual laziness. But on the back of that, there's also a poverty of the imagination. Okay. And to really engage and love the past and love history, you, as I said before, you have to construct it and you have to imagine it. You have to engage with it. And people, I sound like a little fuddy-duddy here, don't I? But people are so reaction. They can't create things because everything's done for them. And they don't want to. It's just very easy to just say, oh, well, that's rubbish and that's shit and that's racism. And that's easy to say that, isn't it? It's easy to knock things down. It's not easy to imagine things and build things. And that's where we are. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons these things happen.
Sometimes it feels as if everyone that's right of the centre and many in the middle have completely abandoned the arts as something of value. I'm not advocating for ideological art, which is usually quite boring, but I'm just wondering if you feel this vacuum like we do, like many of the people in our spaces, for example, don't substantially engage with art on any level.
The one, the one that's really gone is humour, isn't it? Comedy has just disappeared. You cannot laugh at anything. If you do laugh at anything, then the chances are you're indulging in an ism or a phobia. So that's completely gone. You can't watch movies or television because you're being clubbed over the head by this very simplistic message, which is about gender, race, or sexuality. It's one of those messages, or sometimes combination of the two, and white people being wicked. And there's also, white men destroying the environment as well. So that's all. I've just described all television in a sentence there. Yeah, it's frightening. It's depressing. But I never engage with modern culture. I just don't, because there's not a huge amount there to engage with. We were talking about this on the New Culture Forum. What things do you engage with? And Rafe, my colleague on there, said, well, I watch The Archive on the BBC. That's about as near to the modern culture as we'll get. But it's something else about the death of things. It's the end of things in lots of. I don't want to sound really depressing and miserable, but anybody who knows, I mean, you guys are into movies and popular culture, aren't you? Anybody who knows and is into the kind of the currency of popular culture, and anyone who's got a sense of a history of the past of popular culture, film history, television history, music history, my God, pop music history, knows that it's dead. And the thing is, the question is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And I don't have the answer to that. I really don't.
Sorry to cut you off, Philip, but I can see a poster of Parallax View on the back wall there, one of your many posters, and that buries any film of the last 20 years, really, like straight up, like that. If I showed that when I was teaching screenwriting, if I'd showed that to my students, I mean, the stuff I showed them, that a film like that, they wouldn't know how to process a film like that. They wouldn't know what they're being, and their first instinct would be to come at it from a moral standpoint. They would never look beyond that.
It's the simplicity, isn't it, of the approach? What's right and wrong? How can I see this in terms of black and white? But it does feel like we're living. You mentioned the Parallax View. It feels like we're living that amazing montage in the middle of the Parallax.
Yes.
That's what we're. If listeners know about the film, that's what it feels like. We're living
grooming montage.
We're living through that montage, aren't we? There's education for you in a 5-minute clip.
Well, you post regularly on your Twitter feed about what you're reading and watching, and it's always, it's fascinating detective novels and gritty dramas, things like that, which I think is a fascinating insight these days because we're all so siloed away from each other. So I really do appreciate when you do that because it's just you go, oh, okay, like it's not just watching Bridgerton or something, like you're showing us what you're doing. But in terms of your input, you've already answered the question. Have you purposefully created, as I got this term from Victor Davis Hanson, a monastery of the mind apart from the current mainstream of media and entertainment?
Yeah, I always say that my house is very important to me. Okay, and I collect first editions of those novels and furniture and stuff like that. So my house is kind of where these things are housed, and I have created a monastery of the mind. I think many people have. One of the interesting things about the literature I love, and I write about it as well academically, is this kind of 60s and 70s detective, espionage, adventure literature. Is the most unfashionable literature you could possibly imagine.
Okay. I can smell the tobacco smoke just
hearing
that.
Yeah, but one of the interesting things is that these characters from the 60s and 70s, they're not just creations of the 60s and 70s. They're a hangover from an earlier period, actually. So if you take a character like the Saint, for example, which was on television in the 60s, and then the Return of the Saint in the 1970s, the character was actually created in 1928. And so it's almost like some of these characters and the archetype of the private eye, the Humphrey Bogart type thing, which is really popular in 70s literature. And there are lots of 70s private eyes, but essentially they're that Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Humphrey Bogart archetype. And what's really interesting about them is they're characters from previous eras walking through the 60s and 70s, and you get a sense of the counterculture and all of the craziness that's happening in the 60s and 70s meeting something more substantial. And that's where the depth, the richness comes out of those stories. What we've got at the moment, when we're talking about cancelling the past, we don't get those two things meeting anymore. So you're not going to, you don't really get, unless it's ridiculously postmodern and it's sending up the old, you don't get those characters which are actually archetypes from the past in the present, and how the value systems clash or reconcile or feed off each other anymore. You've got this year zero mentality of just modern stuff, and that's why it's so unfulfilling, it's so shallow, it's so devoid of any meaning, really, because it's just about now. It's just about these very shallow kind of rights claims things that are the currency of now. And that's one of the reasons why I love that literature. It's a depth in the literature that lots of people don't really give it credit for, and the literature's disappearing so fast as well that I feel as though I've probably got one of the biggest libraries of it, and I'm preserving it as much as anything else, if that makes sense.
Just quickly, Ricky, I can just picture two examples of those two worlds you talked about meeting, this kind of old world and new world, in a film like The Long Goodbye by Robert Altman, or Clute, which is one of my all-times. Absolutely. You have these stoical guys, seemingly detectives moving through a modern, landscape, LA in one experience, and I think New York in the other. But still, I just, when you mentioned that, that's something, that interplay between the past and the present is something they used to do in the 70s on cinema, for instance. We used to get this sort of. I don't know. They were playing with it. They like some elements of the past. They were critical of others. Whereas now, as you say, it really is year zero. You wouldn't be able to, unless it was a cartoon pastiche, you wouldn't be able to have that. A film like Clute or Long Goodbye, for instance.
Yeah, I think the thing about the 70s was that I'm thinking about people like Peter Bogdanovich, for example, is probably a recent example.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, may he rest in peace. And he was one of those people who adored classical Hollywood and took which is perfectly fine, took the elements that he loved from it and recreated it in the 1970s. But a lot of those new Hollywood guys, a lot of the Easy Riders, Raging Bulls kind of filmmakers, they were enthralled by Hollywood, and it added depth and meaning to their filmmaking, because they were drawing on traditions. And you don't actually have to think about cultural output. You can just think about the culture in general. And once we cut ourselves off from tradition, it's the Roger Scruton thing, isn't it? Tradition is the longitudinal way of finding wisdom, and by testing through generations and generations and generations. Once we cut ourselves off from that and we only see value and wisdom in youth, then we are really going, is what I was saying before, then we're really going on a hiding to nothing. And we're not heading to utopia. We're just swimming in the ocean of blood that's around utopia.
It's interesting what you say there about drawing on tradition, because a lot of what's happening in Hollywood at the moment is a rewriting of Hollywood history in a way. Like there are a number of films or remakes, reboots or reimaginings that come to mind, such as the awful Ghostbusters 2016, which had agenda-flipped characters. The new Indiana Jones, which I'm told is going to be horrendous. Then you've got the Star Wars franchise, The Little Mermaid. Like there's a bunch that come to mind. But rather than create new content, Hollywood's insistent that they rewrite old material and lecture us on why the old version was hateful and bigoted. Can you speculate on what the goals of these companies are? Because many of these remakes, they don't do very well at the box office. And at the end of the day, they do exist to make money, these companies.
I was going to say, it's suicide, isn't it? I think, what was the one that was the gay rom-com that came out recently?
Bros.
Okay, which died. I mean, just completely and utterly died not even a slow and painful death. Just it was a box office bullet in the head. It just died straight away on the first weekend. And then the director or the writer, whoever it was coming out and telling people off for not going. My God, you bigots! You're not seeing my film.
Imagine John Ford doing that.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you, and the film really does, lay into heterosexual. It's a suicide. I've only seen clips of it, but it's a suicidal attempt.
But it's funny that particular film that you referenced there, like, because rom-coms are traditionally females go to see rom-coms and they bring their boyfriends or husbands. Like they don't want to see a film that's trashing what they're into, which is heterosexuality, but also women. Well,
you know anything about me.
But then, because I haven't seen it either, but I've heard there's huge scenes of there's a gay orgy in there essentially at one stage. Like chicks just aren't into that. Like, I mean, the filmmakers obviously didn't read the room, doesn't know who their audience is.
Well, I think that's where Hollywood is now. But do you know what the really awful thing about that film is? And I think the real reason why people didn't go to see it, it's the cultural snobbery that's surrounding it. Yeah, and the sense that the values that people have in Greenwich Village or in the all of that cultural currency of the upper middle class elites. If you don't buy into that, you're stupid. And people understand this. People understand this, and they don't want to go somewhere where they're being condescended to from the screen and told that they're stupid. It's not even actually told that they're wicked. It's just told that they're stupid. You're not us. The sneering tone of that guy's tweets just said all of that. And I don't want to be told I'm stupid and be educated by morons every time I go to the cinema.
But we're staggered because these films all seem to start from the same creative meeting. I mean, I always fantasize about this meeting, the first meeting when they sit down and then the person goes, yeah, anyway, you know how Bond is a sexist, well, not even Bond, they wouldn't even start, they'd say, you know how anyone who sees Bond is a sexist, pig, dinosaur, idiot, moron, douchebag? And then everyone looks around and says, go on. And then no one says, and then they go, anyway, I brought in Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and we've come up with a Bond movie, and yeah, we'd still be better than all the other ones. And no one ever says, point of order, Your Honor, who watches Bond movies? Point of order, Your Honor. Like, has it changed? And then someone in the room will go, "Oh, my daughter went as Bond to a like a Halloween party," and then you go, "Does she watch them?" You go, "No, not really." So, I mean, it just feels like they start from a place of contempt and then try and construct whether it's. I mean, these aren't the greatest examples because we could talk about proper movies, which we might, but Terminator 6 or whatever. All these movies seem to start from the same premise of like, we hate you.
But it's just, I mean, it's so boring as well, isn't it? It's really boring. I've had an idea. Bond's really sexist. I know. Let's make him into a woman. No, let's make him a black woman. Let's make him a black woman in a wheelchair, a trans black woman in a wheelchair. Let's do that. How revolutionary. Who would have thought of that? And they're serious and they're getting paid for this. It's just so.
I don't want to say it out loud, Philip, just in case it happens.
Well, all of these, it probably will. It's so obvious is the point I'm trying to make. It's so one-dimensional and obvious, and it comes back to that previous point I made about the poverty of imagination. We're just obsessed with these stupid things. I've got lots of gay friends and black friends and trans friends. People just say, actually, this is the most unremarkable thing about me. My sexuality is the most unremarkable thing about me. Let's talk about something else, for God's sake. Yeah, that's what most sensible people think. It's only when sexuality becomes weaponized, it becomes politicized, or it's a substitute for personality that it becomes really, really important. And it just feels as though we're in crisis in the culture, and that crisis is being put on screen. It's there to see. That's where we are. We can read our culture by looking at all of these box office flops.
But here's the thing, Philip. In the 70s and in other eras, the culture was in crisis as well. And when it's over, we've got The Godfather, we've got, MASH, we've got, take your pick, Nashville, and there's something to show for it, and we saw those wrestlings on screen, Bonnie and Clyde, which I saw again recently, and I was like, oh, wow, what thank you, the 60s.
You can't see it, but there's the Bonnie and Clyde.
Amazing, though, but basically everything Arthur Penn did, though, like, so, think of Night Moves or something, we've got Night Moves, which is more your genre. So, I mean, I feel like this is, yes, we are in crisis. Perhaps this is all we'll be left with. We'll look back and we'll go, wow, what an awful period of films.
Do you know one of the most interesting things about that, a reflection on that, right? People say at the moment, and I've said it myself, actually, we're reliving the 70s, because we've got, certainly in this country, we've got a fuel crisis, which is like the 1973 oil crisis. We've got economic collapse. There are wars impacting on everything that's going on globally, but also there's industrial strife, all of those things. But really, actually, we're living in a very different place to the 1970s, and we're going through a different kind of crisis. I think the crisis we've got at the moment is that people actually don't have to struggle to put food on the table. Now, I know there's a lot of poverty, and I know that that many people are struggling. But the people we're talking about, the culture warriors, actually, they're not in crisis. Part of their problem is that they don't have enough to worry about. And I think we're in a different place that we are in than we were in the 1970s. All you have to do is you've got the world on your phone. You've got the world on your laptop. You've got the opportunity and ability to kind of publish to the world. It's a different kind of crisis, but you don't have a sense of who or what you are, and there isn't a sense of society cohesion, though there definitely was that still in the 70s. Okay, it was crumbling and it was falling apart, but it was there. I don't think we've got any of that now. So I think it's a different kind of crisis, and I think we're responding to it in the way that you do respond to that kind of crisis.
We talk so much about the bad for various reasons. Perhaps we could flip the script slightly and get you to talk about the dramas from film or TV from yesteryear that give you hope. What are some British works from the latter part of the 20th century that blow you away?
Can we start with music? It might be interesting to
Absolutely.
kind of start with music, because we've not really talked about that. I think there's such a rich legacy that comes right through the 20th century from jazz and actually traditional pop, some great traditional pop. But the thing that I love is when jazz becomes something slightly different. It's the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, and jazz. There's a period where jazz turns into rock and roll, and it's neither one thing nor the other. And there's this glorious moment where there's this incredible amount of freedom, and then you get the sense that there's rock and roll, and it changes the world. So I'm thinking about songs like Rocket 88, which are very early manifestations of rock and roll, but are clearly embedded in jazz and blues, and there's a sense that the culture drives things. So that's in the US, but you see it in the UK as well, and it's when people have enough time and money to make culture on their own, and that idea of lads forming bands essentially, and working class people becoming driving forces in the culture, because there's enough money, and there are things like hire purchase. You can borrow, so you can buy expensive things like guitars and amps and drums and things like that, and you can form bands, and people have the leisure to do that. And there's if there's a single thing about the end of the 50s, the 60s, it's an energy that I think the 70s and 80s feed off, actually, and it runs out in the 90s. But I think there's that energy, and if I had to say it's defined by anything, it's defined by working class people really, really taking pop culture as their own and changing it into something different, and you get all of that stuff. It's not all working class, of course. I mean, if you think about who are probably the really important musical acts culturally of the 60s in this country, well, you probably have to say the Beatles and the Stones. The Stones really, Mick Jagger wasn't really working class. He pretended he was, but he wasn't. He went to the London School of Economics. But you've got the Stones, going through the 60s, releasing great record after great record after great record, but ending up in prison with the drug trials in 1967. Brian Jones dying in 1969, then Altamont ending the 60s. It's a hell of a ride. And it changes things massively. So I think the music drives a lot of stuff, and it drives style, and it drives this sense of self as well. But we're talking about this sense of self now, which is completely fractured and negative. It was really positive then, and I think that's the difference between then and now. And from that, you get this energy. It comes. It's not just in London, in Britain. It's in the provinces. It's really in the north. You see all of these great kitchen sink dramas. You see a lot of the film. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, Look Back in Anger. Really, they're all about the north. They're all about regions. They're all about different places, and they're all about people asserting themselves and trying to change things and striving for things. So we're talking about, the kind of crisis we're in at the moment. What are people striving for? Really? They're striving.
And what will it leave behind?
Change their gender. What are people really striving for? These people are really striving to change the world, in positive ways.
Yeah, I read this on Twitter the other day. Like, this is I can't attribute it. I don't know who said it, but it was something to the effect of, this movement now, whatever we're witnessing, will leave behind no music. No music scene really to speak of, and I would extend that to film and TV. Well, a little bit of TV, but definitely film. So it seems to be a very uncreative movement, completely lacking that energy you speak of.
It speaks of a poverty that, I've said it before, but it's a poverty that's tragic, and I think there's something something about it is the fact that people can't actually sit down and lose themselves in a movie anymore. People can't sit down and lose themselves in an album because they don't have the attention span to do it. I see it myself when I'm teaching. A few years ago, when social media became a thing, and people had phones for the first time and laptops and stuff. If I was teaching, I'd be so offended if someone was looking at a phone. Now, I'd be absolutely puzzled if somebody wasn't. It doesn't mean they're not listening to me, but they might be on Wikipedia. They might be kind of looking up things I've said. They might be doing all sorts of things, but all of this information we have, it's fundamentally changed how we engage with art and culture, actually. And people just really do find it difficult to sit down for a couple of hours and watch a movie, and people don't listen to albums anymore, I don't think. So people just listen to snippets of songs. So you listen to, there's another one there, but people don't sit down and listen to an album as a piece of art, I don't think, anymore. And you don't have the physical entity, which is 12 inches, big enough for cover art, and that went a long time ago, but big enough for cover art, and a set of songs that speak to each other. None of that really exists anymore, and so I think that's one of the reasons why the cultural output is so poverty stricken.
Well, Philip, if I was to start a punk rock band in 2023, I'd sing songs about how great the nuclear family is, how marriage is great, how there are only two genders, how the missionary position is the only position, and I might make a few references to faith and Christianity, and I might talk about how I don't like to recycle and I don't use public transport. Is conservatism the new punk rock?
I think it is. I was going to say, if you were going to be the Sex Pistols in 2023 or the New York Dolls in 2023 or something like that, that's what you would do. And you were doing a Malcolm McLaren Svengali thing. You were putting it together and you're saying, right, okay, what are the pressure points here? What are we going to do? That's precisely what you would do. Last year with the New Culture Forum, we did a conference, and it was where our book Fighting Back came from. And the historian David Starkey came back and spoke to some of the members afterwards, and he got it. He got that. He said essentially the same thing that you've just said. He said, we're the new revolutionaries. We're fighting back against all of this stuff, which is now the orthodoxy, which is now what you have to think, because if you think about it, if you're a young person, right, and you think you're really revolutionary, but you've got the identikit kind of green hair, BLM badge, rainbow stuff, all of the things, you're thinking exactly like Google, you're thinking exactly like the BBC, you're thinking exactly like the education institutions. There is absolutely nothing rebellious about any of it whatsoever. And that's a really bizarre situation to be in. If you think about it, it's a really bizarre situation to be in. There's, to push back on all of that stuff, you're looking to conservatism. You're looking to thinkers like Roger Scruton. You're looking to thinkers like Edmund Burke. It's a really bizarre situation, but that's the situation we're in.
Do you think there would be an avenue, though, if there were acts in rock music or punk music that sort of went for this conservatism bent? How would they get their stuff out there? Because chances are, streaming services are getting more woke. YouTube, you might get demonetized, you might get shadow banned. Like, how would you get your stuff out there?
You probably wouldn't choose music, actually. If you were going to be a cultural activist, and you were going to do something that pushes against all of this stuff, actually, you probably wouldn't you wouldn't choose music. I don't know what you'd choose, actually, because I'm removed in terms of age. We're talking about young people here, aren't we, fighting back? I'm removed in terms of age, so I don't know. My generation would have chosen music. I did. I was in a band. I was in a rock and roll band, So we made music, and that was how we got our message out there. I don't think you would use music now. I don't know what you'd use, but I don't think you'd form a band is the answer to that.
Yeah. NFTs, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you do.
The lack of like the fact that we've had to just say goodbye to bands completely, and the disinterest shown by, and I'm not, it just is a fact that if that younger people they're not interested in music in that way. They don't read liner notes, and I'm not I'm not making that a nostalgic thing. It's just it's not getting lost in lyrics was something that I used to do as a young person. I just don't feel that it's happening much now.
Music was a portal into the past for me as well, in a way that so I started with the very obvious stuff when I really first got into music when I was a teenager in the 80s, and that was the local kind of indie scene, of indie music, the Smiths and all. It was got all alternative, and it was quite cool, but it was just the music of the time. And then I got into punk from that because it came from punk. And then from punk, I got into the New York stuff, New York Dolls and all of the kind of, the Velvets. And from there, I got into the Stones, which I think, that's the kind of stuff that I really love, and 60s garage music and all of that stuff. So it was a continuous journey back of but I think kids still do that. When I teach kids and I play them all of this stuff, they're absolutely fascinated. But I don't know if then they go on and continue with it. With me, I just knew it was what I wanted to do, and I knew from about the age of 13. I was so interested and fascinated in this journey. It's a cliche, but it's a journey going backwards and exploring all of this stuff. And the music scene enabled me to do that. So I don't think young people have that now. And I was always interested in what the past had to offer. And now people are frightened of the past because the past is wicked, the past is evil. So people don't want to go there. They only want to go there, as we started this conversation, to tell it off. So I think music maybe does different things for people now. And one of them is certainly not opening up the past to people. And that's a dreadful shame. That's as tragic as anything that we said today, actually.
Well, we've got one final question on a cinematic topic here. Do you have any view on the cowardice of many of the cinematic titans of the past? Many whom have not made any public comment about the vandalism of their art form or the nonsensical top-down rules that would have robbed us of their best movies. We used to read about the wild rebels of the Hollywood New Wave, for instance, or the Sundance Crew, yet the people we hear defending common sense and art, it's not Martin Scorsese, it's not Brian De Palma, it's not Steven Spielberg, but it's not Rob Reiner, but it's Rob Schneider or Jim Abrams, who made Airplane and Naked Gun. What are we to make of this silence in the face of what is an existential threat to the screen arts?
God, it's a really good question, and my instinct is to call them out, but people get older. People maybe aren't quite sure what's going on. I mean, that's probably not an excuse, actually, in any meaningful way. But
Steven Spielberg couldn't have said the word Latinx or Latinx more recently.
I know. I mean, I'm being too generous here, but I'm always just a little bit hesitant to kind of say, well, you should be at the the barricades, you should be fighting for this. It's sad. Is as far as I'll go. It just feels as though, for me, it just feels as though it's over. And I suppose I'm not giving you the answer that you thought I would give you, actually, am I? But it just feels as though it's over, and I can't get really worked up about those type of people not standing up for things. I want the younger filmmakers to actually make great films. Now, you could say that, well, they need people like Spielberg, and Brian De Palma, and all of those people to actually give them the impetus to say that and tell them that they can do anything. And I wouldn't disagree with you. And I know I'm fudging here, but I don't know. I just feel hesitant to have a go at geniuses. Really, it's tragic more than anything else, but it's just the way it is.
Has Tarantino come out?
He's one of the only ones who's edged as close as you can get in Hollywood to saying anything, hinting like, because there is no way that any of the people we've talked about, I would say any of those titans, the upper pantheon filmmakers or whoever, there is no way they would believe or subscribe to any of these dumb ideas of today. They wouldn't. They would think it's a meritocracy. They would think that it's their way or the highway. They'd think that dictatorial rule is how art should be, and that they should just be able to do what they want. They would think it would just be. They're probably firing guns on set and, like, driving cars without telling anybody, shutting down bridges like Friedkin did and stuff. So they might regret some of that stuff. But in terms of who they have to cast and the stories they have to tell and the guardrails that have been put up on their stories, like, you'd never be able to have an ambiguous ending. All those endings we love, then none of them would exist, because you'd go, oh, well, like that's not, they would just force you to go a different way, or there would be, yet this is the last slam I'll do, there would always be a sassy boss bitch chick, like in Godfather Part 4, Michaela would be her name, and she would be like, and she'd be telling Michael what to do. She'd be like, "Shut up, you old man." She'd be like, "This is how you do it." Well, yeah, she'd go, "This is how you do it," and then she would school him. So these guys are saying nothing, and I think it's besmirching their entire.
I think you're right. I think you're right, but I don't think they're the same people that they were, because they're older versions of those people, and you change with age, and. They were the easy riders and raging bulls, weren't they? They were there to kick the shit out of it, tear up the rule book and start again. And they were doing that because they were all young. Now they're all old, and they are not the people to be challenging things. It needs to come from younger people. The proviso there, of course, is what I said before. Younger people need people to kind of show them the way. But I think what young people should do is look to the old films and look to the people they were, not to the people they are.
Well, we can't beat that. That's I 100% agree with that. I'm going to end it right there. But we do need to first get some plugs from you. So where can people find you, Philip, online?
You can find me on Twitter, which is Kiszely Philip. I think there are two, but there's Kiszely Philip is the one, my last name, and then Philip. You can see me. I tweet like there's no tomorrow. So as you know, so I'm there. You can also find me on Facebook as well, just under my name, and on Instagram, and I'm part of New Culture Forum.
Yes, search the New Culture Forum on YouTube and watch all their videos.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the New Flesh podcast. If you like our work, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or even writing us a review. It really does help the show reach a wider audience. We'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, long live the New Flesh.